live videos. I tend to like this. I can keep doing some more of these. So yesterday, I showed you guys like the initial prep work, which was just basically sanding and kind of getting things smoothed out and prep for paint. And so I did that, and then I also base coated the black parts and the white areas. So I let those dry overnight. And now I'm going in and I'm doing the highlighting on the black part of the suit. So let me show you what I'm going to use as a reference. Oh, I can't. It's on the back of my camera. Hold on. I just got a new phone. I can show you on this phone, even though it's not activated. I got a new phone with the better, hopefully with a camera that works better, so I can do better photos and stuff for my clients. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this artwork as my reference, and I sent this to my client. He's like, I think this suit should be darker, and it is. I'm just using this as reference for the highlighting and stuff. So I am going to use the highlighting kind of towards this shade of blue on the black, but the suit will be more towards black. So to achieve that, I first base coat all the areas that are going to be black in black. Pretty self-explanatory. So like this. I've got the hands and the feet base coated in a very, very dark, cool tone. It may be a little too dark, but I'm going to highlight those areas with white and then make those white. But to do the black areas, this is what I do. I base coat in black, and then I'm using Mr. Color number 72 intermediate blue. Now, initially it looks a little bright in the jar, but once you put it on top of the black, it tones it down. And then when I go in to blend in on top of this, you'll have a black suit with undertones of blue highlights. So I got this over thin pretty good. I've got my airbrush cranked down, so not a whole lot of paint comes out. And I'm just going through and just hitting all the muscles. So anywhere there's a muscle, I'm just slowly working it up. And this takes a while. So I put a very little bit of paint on at a time. So I want to build this up slowly. Get a little more paint come out. There we go. And I just kind of hit the high spot real hard and just let it kind of fan down. Just blend it out. So I'm done with this step. It'll actually look pretty close to the artwork I'm using as reference, but we want the suit to look black, not blue. So I'll do this one arm. I'll show you all this highlighting. This could be a long feed. If I show the whole process, this might be a long live feed. We'll see. We'll see how many people want to tag along for the hour. So this may take me to do. And again, this is, even though I'm doing live, it's hard for me to see what I'm doing. So I'm trying to show you guys on camera and see what I'm doing at the same time. Just like that. There's a little wrinkle right here. I'm gonna get this light to come back at me a little bit and try to get a kind of a harsh, there we go. I need some edge light so I can see the shapes. So again, I kind of show this on the Jubilee. If it's a big soft muscle or shape, I back off and let it be real nice and soft. It's kind of a real kind of free flowing kind of process. It just takes a while because there's a lot of subtle details sculpted in these pieces that you don't see right away. And the more I've been working on figures, the more familiar with anatomy I've come. I've become more aware of like where muscles should be and stuff. So then I know where to look to see if the sculptor has sculpted that really fine muscle. Like in the bicep, there's actually three or four that come down, and sometimes they're really prominent in the sculpt. Other times they're very sort of like they're here, it's there, but it's really hard to see this. Like this, for instance, this muscle right here that I just highlighted in this one. If I didn't highlight those, you really wouldn't see them. But as I turn this in the light, I can see it. But it's super subtle. It's a really subtle sculpt. It's not like a Wolverine where he's all jacked up and everything's like super, super obvious. So as I turn this in the light, I see all the different muscles sculpted in. Part of it is just getting my light into a position where I can see what I'm doing. So today's goal is to get the black done and the white done, and that'll be a full day. Because what I'll do is I'll do the highlighting, and then I'll mist black on this. I'll just keep misting black on this until I get the tone I want. Hey, do you mind closing the door a little bit, babe? My wife is using the spray booth, and the door's open, so it's a little loud. So what I'll do is I'll do the highlighting, and I'll just mist black on this until I get the tone I want. So I'll do all the highlighting first, so it's all the consistent, and then I'll go and do all the blending all at the same time. Because if I was to like do this and then blend this piece, I might be slightly different. So I try to do all the same step, like an assembly line. A little muscle right there. So this arm is just about there. So this black it'll be black, but with a little blue undertone. There's a few little wrinkles in here. We're going to kind of hit those a little bit too. Not too many. Okay. This is a really nice sculpt. I really like it. I don't know who the sculptor is because Wolfpacks doesn't put the sculptor on the bottom of their label, so I can't, without going through and doing the research, I can't give credit to the sculptor, but I really like it. Um, I love the pose on this guy. It's like really dynamic. Wolfpacks puts out a really good product. They're one of the higher priced custom groups out there. But I think they're worth it. And I like their pieces because they're not huge. I mean, they don't take up a ton of space. They do a lot of museum pose pieces, so small footprint. They really concentrate, I think, on the sculpt of the character, and you know, just let that kind of speak for itself. I do like a really kind of elaborate base too, as long as it tells a story. Okay, so that arm is, I think that's about done as far as highlighting goes. So there, just on that one little piece, that took me, what, 10 minutes or so? So that's looking pretty good, I think. I also base coated the parts for the sword. Those will get sprayed like a gold, or I'm thinking how I want to do those as far as to get the effect. So let's do another arm. Okay. I'm just gonna clean up my area a little bit here. Put the Let's put the lid on that paint so I don't spill paint on it. So the black on this is Mr. Color GX number 2 black. I tend to use Mr. Color a lot. It's still kind of my favorite paint. I didn't start using acrylics till a few years ago. Before when I did Gundams, all I ever used were Mr. Colors. Now with the figures, I'm using a little bit of everything. I use Tamiya, Mr. Color, Vallejo. So I use just about everything now. It all depends on what I'm doing. I love Mr. Color for base coating and doing the shading. I can't get an acrylic thinned to spray and to fade as smoothly as a Mr. Color. I've never been able to do it. The exception is Tamiya because it's an acrylac. It's a hybrid paint. It's not a true acrylic. It's not a true lacquer. So a couple years ago, someone enlightened me that you can actually thin Tamiya paint with Mr. Color thinner, and then it sprays like Mr. Color. It's like, holy crap! I wish I would have known that like 10 years ago, because Tamiya, their color line is more geared towards military subject matter, so you get some of the kind of the greens and the browns that you can't get in Mr. Color, and vice versa. Mr. Color is geared towards more anime and Gundam and that kind of thing, so you get the brighter colors. So between those two lines of paint, I used to not do any custom mixes, simply because I didn't want to have extra paint left over and waste it. Now I do a lot of custom mixing of paint, and if you're careful, you can mix Mr. Color paint with Tamiya paint. I've done it. Just, you've got to be careful. If you do it too much, too fast, and they don't jive. But if you do them real slow and thin them out, you can actually mix the two brands to get different colors. So this may not be the most exciting video to watch. I mean, yesterday's was sanding, so anyone who decides to watch me for a little while. So here on this bicep, he's got two muscles here, and then the big muscle. So I'm just gonna kind of hit the overall muscle, back off a little bit. And then when I blend in the black, you'll get two different tones there. You'll get a brighter one for those two muscles, and then a softer tone for the overall muscle. And depending on how this blends, I'll probably have to go back and hit the shadows a little bit again. Bob Ross, yeah. All I need is an afro. Happy little Nightcrawler. We're gonna paint some happy little highlights here. So here we got this kind of harsh muscle. I'm just hitting it real hard. I'm hitting not much paint, but I'm just gonna hit it a few times and really bring that highlight up. Again, right here, this kind of, it's hard to see until you turn on the light, but there's a little muscle right here. And there's another one right here. Again, I'm not a, I don't know which muscle to call that. And then there's another one right here. So right there's like 3 little muscles on that one little spot the way this is sculpted. So right here I've got 1, 2, and then I got like 3 little muscles right there. What's up, Bad Blood Studios? So again, it's not the most exciting thing to watch, but again, I like to try to show stuff in real time. And this client, I like, this is a new, this is a client that I painted for before, and I like him because he basically told me do what I want. The only thing he asked is that to send him work in progress photos, which I do anyway, but just specifically on the skin tones, on the faces. So I sent him a picture of that artwork that I wanted to use as reference, and the only comment he says is just make sure the suit's darker. And I said, yeah, that's just a reference for the highlighting and the tone of the highlights. It'll look black, but you'll have these undertones of blues for the highlights. So right here, again, I like to do this. I'll get a stick. So as I turn this in the light, I'm not sure if it shows up in camera, but right here, there's a muscle here, and there's a muscle right there. It's hard to see it until you get it on an oblique light. So I'm gonna hit that a little hard, and I'm gonna go right next to it. So you see every once in a while, I'll take my brush and I'll just kind of spray it off to the side. Because even with lacquers, I'll get dry tip every once in a while. It's very rare that I get dry tip with lacquer. Acrylics, dry tip all the time. And that's one reason I like the lacquers is because I can just keep going 99% of the time without any issues with the paint clogging or dry tipping. It's just way easier to paint with, I think. Acrylics are great, but man, they're way more troublesome, I think, than lacquers. As far as how easy they are to use, lacquers are way easier to paint with. So right there, I got a little dry tip. As I say that, I get dry tip, and now my brush is clogged. Oh my gosh, that's funny. So I'll just take this off, and there we go. That's funny. As soon as I said that, my airbrush is like, yeah, fuck you. I'll show you. I'll just paint with the needle guard off. So I'm gonna hit that muscle pretty hard, and I'm gonna back off and let it fan down. and just blend it a little softer so it doesn't look drawn on. Sorry, my phone rang. So hopefully we're still there. I watched. What was that? I watched it. Oh, I watched 15 hours. If it's for me, I'm not here. That's funny. It was spam. All I get are sales calls on my phone now. I don't get like any. It's or my mom, but it's all back in the day when before cell phones, you got all these sales calls on your landline. That's all I get on my cell phone are sales calls. So I just block. I just hit the block button. Yeah, this little arm has a lot of tighter muscles in it just because of the way it's extended. He's going to be flexing more. Especially right here on the wrist and the forearm. Right here in the elbow, there's always two little muscles in the elbow. Same with the knee. There's always two little, like you got the kneecap and then the ligaments and stuff. Okay, that's looking pretty good. With the tricep right here, pretty harsh. I'll let that fan off and soften up. So I'm backed off pretty far. Well, pretty far. I'm like 3 or 4 inches away from the surface. It looks further in camera, but maybe 2 or 3 inches away from the surface, and it gets a nice soft transition to the muscle, to the highlight. And then I get tight. As I always say, I get tighter, so it's a tighter muscle, a tighter highlight. Okay, I think that arm's looking pretty good. Let's see, any wrinkles in the suit I need to hit. I'm not seeing any wrinkles on this part. Maybe a little one right here. And a little one right here. And it'll just be a very slightly brighter tone than the rest, so it'll show up just a little bit, just real subtle. There's a little wrinkle right here, like that. And there's a little soft wrinkle right here, like that. And I think that arm's looking pretty good. So I got these pretty tight right here. They're a little harsh. I'm going to back off and I'm going to soften that up a little bit. Just going to back off a little bit and just kind of, because it looks a little drawn on. Just like that. Okay, that arm looks good. Let's do the other arm. Now I want to show you something. So this arm I just sprayed. Okay, this was the first arm I did, and it's been another 15 minutes or so. Now you can see that after about 15 minutes, maybe it's not showing up in camera. This is dried down a little bit, so about half a shade darker than this. So that's exactly what I want. So if you're a painter and you're familiar with a type of paint you use, you know that as things dry, they get darker, and you become familiar with how much they'll dry down. I'll zoom in a little bit here. the Mr. Color paints, when I was doing Gundams, I would usually let things dry overnight um, before I did any highlighting, but I don't do that anymore because I'm like really familiar with it. I would do this arm and then we'll do the body, and then we can start blending in. And then once I do the blending, I will let that step dry probably for a few hours. And then I'll go back and look at it and see if I need to do any more blending or hit the shadows again to see if, because as I highlight here, you can see that the paint goes down into the shadows, which is what I want. I don't want, it makes it look more natural. But sometimes you get a little too much overspray in the shadows and it fills them in a little too much. What's that say? Someone just commented. How do you know which colors work well with each other? It's just knowing color theory. Really, just knowing. As far as like the shading and stuff goes, it's knowing. Okay, how's the base coat going to affect my highlight color? So I know that this is pretty bright out of the jar, but that's not what I want. But I know when I spray it on black, it's gonna dull this down about at least a full shade. And then I know when I blend black on top of this real thin, that it's gonna knock it down even more and just bring the shadows out more. It's really just knowing color theory and knowing which colors mix together make what other colors, and knowing that if I mix like green and brown or green and red, I'm gonna get brown, and I don't want to do that. So unless I'm trying to make a custom color, but yeah, it's just knowing color theory and kind of having a basic understanding of knowing what colors do to other colors, and then knowing, like a lot of guys don't ever do shading with black or white. I do it all the time. It is a more contrasty look, but as I blend it in more, I can soften that contrast. Certain colors are harder. Reds are really hard to do. I shouldn't say they're really hard. I don't have any problems with reds. I know a lot of guys hate painting reds because it's one of the harder colors to get right, and simply because it does a really crappy job of covering and hiding. And that's with any paint. Like when I used to paint cars for a living, if I was doing a full paint job on a car, normally I could get away with like a gallon and a half of paint. In any other color, if I was doing red, it would take me 3 to 4 gallons of paint, just because for whatever reason red does not hide well. But I can use it to my advantage when I'm doing highlighting and shading. And I'll do another live video when I do the red on this, and I'll show you how that plays to our advantage when you're doing the kind of the techniques that I do, which is right here, base coat, highlight, and then blend. A lot of guys will tend to, like, they would base coat with their highlight color and then add shadows. I've done that a few times. It's a little less natural looking. I think things start to look drawn on instead of, they're not as subtle. So I tend to like to go dark to light. It takes more layers of paint, but I think it all blends it together a little bit better, a little more naturally. So a lot of times when I do this technique, I'll use actually a darker blue for the highlight, and then I get a really deep, kind of almost midnight blue for highlight. But I wanted the highlights to be a little more prominent on this to bring out the sculpt, and I just wanted a lighter tone in the highlights. So that's why I'm going with this intermediate blue rather than a darker blue. Color theory is boring to watch a video on color theory would be very boring. I took a lot of color theory in college, just for photography and stuff. I'd have to be honest, like 90% of the terminology and stuff I would be lost on, as far as like the different terminology in color theory. But I just know just from studying it and having to learn it, how colors work together. And you also learn that in photography, like in old school photography, especially like when I used to shoot interiors or architecture. If you're shooting on film, it's not like digital these days where you can easily take, 5 or 6 photos of a scene, color correct each of those photos and blend them together. No, back in the day, and this is where I got most of my color theory knowledge from, is like if I was shooting, like I worked on a job where I was with a photographer, we were shooting a bunch of Cinemark theaters. We were shooting it all on film. But in a theater or any room, you have, let's say, 5 or 6 different light sources, and all those light sources are actually a different color. So if you have an incandescent light, that's going to be like an orange or yellow color. If you have a fluorescent, that's actually green. If you have a halogen, that could go magenta or another color. So they all have different color temperatures. So what you do in order to get them all the same temperature, so you can shoot one piece of film, is you go and gel all those lights. So if you're trying to get everything to the same daylight color temperature, which is 5,500 Kelvin, an incandescent light is around 3,200 Kelvin. Well, you would put on a blue gel to get that 3,200 up to 5,500 Kelvin. So you'd have to go through and gel all the lights, all the candy, snack bars and everything, and we would spend hours gelling the lights so everything was the same color temperature. So you learn that real quick. That if that's another way of learning color theories. Back in old school photography on film, we would gel lights rather than just taking a bunch of photographs and then digitally color correcting everything. Because back then it was more expensive to do that than to just gel everything and shoot 1 or 2 pieces of film and get the shot in one thing. So yeah, these days you don't do that. You don't go through and gel everything. You take a bunch of photos and then selectively color correct everything in Photoshop or Lightroom or Bridge, whatever your editing software is you like to use, and do it that way. So that was another way I learned a lot about color theory and how colors react to each other and all that stuff. So yeah, just studying photography in college, you had to learn it. I used to own an old school color temperature meter, and it was crazy expensive. It was like a $1,500 piece of equipment, but basically you put it under any light source, and it tells you what color temperature it is. Um, and then you could also dial in, like let's say you put underneath it a light, and it's telling you it's this temperature, but you want to convert that light to another temperature. It will tell you which gel or which combination of gels to use to get it to the temperature you want. So it's very helpful for shooting architecture and stuff like that, interiors, where you have a bunch of different light sources and they're all different color temperatures. Because your eye naturally converts everything to daylight for the most part. So, like, I'm working in my workroom right now. The lights I have on my desktop are technically like 4,200 Kelvin, but my eye sees daylight. Your eye uh, is very good at compensating and adjusting so everything looks pretty much the same. Unless it's like a really warm light, like a really low wattage incandescent light. Well, it's gonna look yellow or orange, you know. But it's amazing how well the eye can adjust for color differences in a scene or something like that. It's also really interesting that your eye, you know, it's every time I ship a piece to a client and they get it, it's like, wow, it looks better than the photos. So when I get that comment, I know I've done my job right because your eye can see way more detail and way more subtle tonal variations than my camera will ever pick up. Um, so a lot of times, a lot of the really good painters, the guys that I follow, you know, a lot of times the stuff you see in on a picture is not what you see in person, because I know there's a lot of subtle variations in the tones and stuff, and the camera just doesn't pick it up. The lights blow it out or whatever. But when you get it in person, you see all those subtle tones and shading and stuff. So really, when you're painting, you can paint for two purposes. You can paint for so it looks good in a photo, or you can paint so it looks good in person. I always paint so it looks good in person. So A lot of times I tell my clients like, hey, is there shading there? It's just really subtle, but you'll see it when you get in person. So like the Jubilee I just finished, I was telling my clients like it maybe look a little flat right now, but once you get it in person, you'll see that in her face. There's a lot more tonal variations in her face, like as far as the shading and stuff like that, bringing out the details. Like that's fine. That's what I like. So a lot of times when I see a piece in a photo and I see it's real punchy, which sometimes I like, I know in person it's gonna be crazy punchy because, and there's a couple of ways to get the shading to show up more in a photo. You just make the photograph a little bit darker, slightly underexpose it, and I think that's why when I see a lot of guys work, they post photos and they like, man, this looks really dark to me. Well, they're trying to show all the shading, all the work they've put into the piece. But then I think the photos are too dark and it doesn't do the piece justice because you're missing all the details and stuff. Uh, and it's, I don't know, it's kind of a fine line between, okay, do I take a photograph with the correct exposure and everything, or do I adjust my exposure to really bring out the shading? And I typically just try to get a really good overall good exposed photograph so you can see all the colors and the details. And I'll sacrifice a little bit of the shading that's there. So there's kind of it depends, you know. Okay, so I think that arm's pretty good. That looks good there. There's a little muscle right here I missed. And let's see if there's any wrinkles I gotta get. There's a little one right here. Sorry. There's a wrinkle here, but I can't see it when I get in front of the camera. That may be it. Okay, so the arms are shaded, or highlighted. Those look pretty good. You can see them there in the background. Okay, now the body, which is, I've got this hanging up over here. This will take a while because there's a lot of surface area to cover. So looking at this on this sculpt, so this center part here goes red. So I'll spray this. I'll get it all blended. I'll let this dry overnight because I'll have to do all this masking to mask this off. And I don't like to mask the same day. I let it dry at least overnight. Now right here, this red part comes around the back neck, but the sculpt kind of stops right here. So I'll just kind of have to guesstimate where that goes because the trim stops here and here to accommodate for the heads that go on. Okay. I'll try. This I may have to adjust my camera angle. So I can see better what I'm doing. Sometimes it's better for me to see what I'm doing than to show you guys what I'm doing. You can see I've got my crappy kind of like pajama shorts on. I like these. I just wipe my hands off on them and I don't care if I get paint on them or anything. Now, I could reduce the amount of overspray I'm getting into the shadows if I reduce my air pressure a little bit, but I like how soft. When I up the air pressure a little bit, I get a softer transition. It just atomizes the paint a little bit better. So like you hear the Adam's apple, I'm gonna back off a little bit and blend that out a little bit more. hard to get into these little muscles down here, but we're gonna hit them. I kind of messed up right there. I kind of hit paint right down the center of a 6-pack, so I have to hit that a little harder when I go to blend. I'll just hit that a little harder with a little bit of black to compensate for that. I'm going to just hit the back here a little bit. You're not going to see this because the heads will be on, but we're going to do it anyway. Okay. Okay, so there's the neckline. Looking pretty good. Hit these abs pretty hard. These aren't abs, these. I'm not sure what these are. What these are called. Let's see. When you're painting, how do you get the sticks attached to the arm pieces without using clamps? So the arms, I just drilled a hole. Yeah, I just drilled a hole, 5/32 inch hole, stuck the stick in there. That's pretty simple. Yeah, that's all I do. And depending on the piece, like on the feet and the hands here, well, not those, on the hands, since this is the female key and there's not a lot of meat in there for a skewer, I just drilled a 3/32 inch hole and put a piece of brass in there. So there'll be holes where the sticks go, but it doesn't matter because, you know, it's in the key and you're not going to see it when the piece is together. Yeah, I kind of went over that yesterday in my live video yesterday, just getting prep and getting all the pieces ready to paint. So after I got everything kind of lightly sanded, I gave everything a really good bath in some dishwashing soap and warm water and a scrub brush, and I scrubbed it all down really well. I usually do it twice, just to make sure I get any contaminants, surface contaminants off from my hands or from the factory. I never paint a piece without washing it first, because even though the factories prime these, you know, they get handled by the people in the factory packing them, and you just never, there could be stuff flying in the air that lands on it. And even then, sometimes even after I wash it, sometimes I'll get what's called a fisheye in the paint, which tells me that there's a little contamination on the surface. So if that happens, I'll sand that little spot down and I'll repaint it, because that lets me know that if I paint that and I go to mask it later, there's a good chance the paint will lift off. So fisheye is exactly what it's like. You put something down and you get this circle, and usually the circle forms around a speck of dust or dirt, and it's just it's repelling the paint. So now here, it's harder to shade areas that have soft muscles because they're hard to see. So like right here, it's very subtle as far as the muscle definition. So I'm going to back off quite a bit. But it's real subtle. It's a little more defined right there, so I'll come in a little tighter. because they're just harder to see. Sometimes I'll go in there, and if I know there's supposed to be muscle and it's not sculpted in, I'll add a highlight, and I'll kind of fake it out to give the illusion that there's a muscle there that I know it's supposed to be there, but it's not sculpted in. So that's, the more you paint these, the more you become familiar with anatomy and where things are supposed to be. So, and the reason I'm painting the black first is because this piece of trim right here is the same color as this, the red. So if I was to paint the red first and then try to paint the black next, I would have to mask over this trim. By doing the black first, I can mask up right against that trim. It's a much easier masking job than trying to do the red first then the black. Because I'll use masking tape, not silly putty, to do the masking. And I use silly putties sometimes. If I'm using acrylic, silly putties are great. Silly putty is not great when you're spraying lacquers because silly putty is a plastic, and if you're using a solvent-based paint, it will melt the silly putty. And I've had instances where, like, if I use silly putty to mask and I spray Mr. Color, and I leave it on too long, then it melts to the surface, and I have to kind of fix that area because the silly putty is melted to the surface. So a lot of my figure buddies like, why aren't you using silly putty? Well, first of all, the main reason is because I can't get a super sharp edge with silly putty like I can with masking tape. And the next reason is because I'm shooting a lacquer or a solvent-based paint, it'll melt the silly putty to the surface, and it's a pain in the ass to try to take off, or you just causes more issues. And I just prefer masking tape. It's way more accurate. I think guys are afraid about masking tape. They're afraid it's going to lift. It's going to lift paint. But I've always said if you've prepped your piece correctly, you shouldn't have any lifting. I do get lifting every once in a while. It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't have like. It doesn't like. It's not like I don't ever get lifting. It's rare, but I do, and you just got to fix it. But I rather. To me, it's easier than going in and touching up all the edges around the silly putty, trying to get to match and blend. I just think it's way easier. Now on this piece where I've got some pretty tight areas to get into for masking, I will use a little bit of silly putty, and it'll be right. I'll use tape, but then I'll use silly putty right here, probably in this curve, because it's really hard to get tape to get to that shape. So in that instance, I'll use a little bit of silly putty right on that spot, but 99% of it will be tape. I'm gonna start my phone ringing again. The other day, and scored a free bag of stone powder. What's that? Stone powder. I don't know what that is. Oh, like, yeah. Yeah, so James, if you're still watching, I've got a bunch of videos. Go through my playlists, and I've got a ton of like full-on work in progress videos on figures and Gundam. And the longer videos will go more into depth on airbrushing and stuff like that. But they're long. I mean, some of the videos are 2 hours long. So, but that's good. I don't do a lot of editing. So like down here, it's kind of hard to get paint into, just because of the way this is sculpted and put together. So once I'm done with this, all the highlighting, I'll let this dry for a little while before I do the blending. So I probably won't videotape that because it'll be, unless I just go live again later today. This video is all about the highlighting. It's looking pretty good, I think. Okay. So the torso looks good. Move on to the legs. Okay. It's looking good. Okay. Let's move on to the legs and the butt. All right. For the glutes, I back way off. There's some opened up my needle a little bit so I get a little more paint coming out. These are real soft shapes here. So we're backed off, and then the paint kind of just fade into the down into the shadows a little bit. So here it's a little hard to get paint to these areas because the legs are it's all one piece with the body. So sometimes you kind of have to fight getting paint where you want it. There's a wrinkle right here which I'm hitting. So this will be rather long. This will be a rather long live broadcast, hour and a half or so, to do all the shade, all the highlighting. Sometimes, depending on the piece, it'll take me an entire day to do one color. So like a good example is the Gladiator I did a few months ago. Just to do the red took me 12 hours, 12 or 15 hours just to do the red because of all the. It's just a big piece, and there's a lot of this highlighting and then blending in the red and going back and hitting the shadows. It was a very long day to get that red done, but it looked really good in the end. So here I'm just kind of the fake getting paint where I want it. And also right now the paint, the black is, it's actually a gloss paint, but it never comes out super glossy. It's kind of dries as like a semi-gloss. And this is a semi-gloss paint. And once this gets sealed and flattened down, the shading will really pop. It's hard. It's always harder to see shading on a glossy surface because the light's reflecting back into your eye, and you're just seeing a lot of highlight. You're not seeing a lot of the shadow. Once you flatten it down and it kills some of the glare off the piece, then the shading really pops. There's some wrinkles right here. Gonna hit those. But this blue and white will take this. There'll be a day to get these done. So a full day in the studio for me is about 10 hours, 10 to 12 hours of painting. So if anyone who's watching is into Star Wars stuff, there's a company that's actually that's local to me that I just started following a little while ago called Merlin Models. And it's a couple guys that are producing some Star Wars kits. They also, for a while, they were selling 3D files. I don't know if they're getting away from that because 3D files tend to get pirated and passed around and sold as their own. But I know they just released a pre-order for their studio scale AT-AT, and it looks really really nice. They printed the prototype in house on one of their 3D printers, but they're having it produced overseas, casted in resin. It's studio scale, so I think it's 1/48 scale. So it's big. It's a big piece, and I think the price they're asking for is really reasonable. I think it's either $1,200 or $1,400, I think, for the piece, which I think is a very reasonable price for a studio scale AT-AT kit that's got all the metal bits and everything. It's posable. Um, I I don't know if it comes with a cockpit, like an interior. Um, but yeah, it's a nice piece. I posted I shared their post on my personal page a while ago. But if you do a search for Merlin Models on Facebook, you'll find them, and they have a YouTube channel too, where they show like painting processes too. So I've been following those guys in there. They do some nice work. But go check them out, and if you're into Star Wars, support them because looks like they're gonna put out some nice products. Back again. Stupid phone keeps ringing. All right, we're almost done shading here, or highlighting, I should say. Okay. Get this calf pretty good. Back up. Okay, I think that leg is just about there. Nope, there's a muscle right here I kind of missed. Alright, that's looking good. We'll do the other leg. And then I'll stop recording after this leg. It's the same thing over and over again. That'd be long enough of me rambling on and doing the same thing. This piece is it's hard to handle. Trying to find a place to grab it while you paint and not mess up your paint you just did. It's challenging. It's hard to get paint down there, and it's a little more overspray than I want. So I'll have to, when I do my blending, I'll just have to hit the shadows a little bit in that area. I think I filled in a little too much of this highlight color. But the way I have to spray it, going in this direction, which is getting a little more overspray down there than what I want. It's not the end of the world. It just is. It is what it is. So here, just on this muscle right here, there's a muscle 1, 2, 3. At least it's all the way it's sculpted. I'm gonna hit these little highlights first. This right here. This right here. And then we're gonna back off and just kind of hit the top overall. And I'll get some nice little tonal variation right there on top of that muscle. It'll be real subtle. It probably won't show up in camera to take photos, but it'll be there in person. almost done, guys. So a few people who've stuck around. All right. Think that the highlighting is done. Alrighty, so that looks really good. So what I'll do is I'll let this dry for an hour or so. I'll work on highlighting the white with white. It'd be the same process. So on the hands and the feet, I'll highlight with white and I'll blend with white to get the tones I want. I'll let this dry, let it dry down for a while, and then I'll blend in the black. And then if I have to hit any of the shadows again, I'll go back in and do that. But that's it for this live broadcast. Just kind of again, tutorial on kind of highlighting the way I like to do things. I'll work in a dark base coat. I'll add a highlight color, and then I'll blend in with that initial base coat or whatever color I'm trying to achieve on top, and go from there. So for everyone that watched, thanks. We'll catch you guys next time.